welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. This week's guest is an award-winning writer and illustrator, best known for her Charlie and Lola children's series, which my two grew up on and loved. Lauren Child published her first Charlie and Lola, I Will Not Ever Never Eat a Tomato, 25 years ago, and won the prestigious Kate Greenaway Medal from the Library Association for the most distinguished illustration in a book for children. She's also a former children's laureate. I Am Wishing Every Minute for Christmas has just come out, and I'm at Lauren's studio in London, where the enthralling stories and endearing characters come to life. Lauren, thank you so much for inviting me to the studio.
Oh, thank you for coming.
I know this is audio only, but I almost feel I need to ask you for a little description. I feel like I've walked into quite a magical world.
Oh, thank you. I think I'm so affected by the environment that I'm working in that I have to set it up in such a way that I feel inspired to work. I've never been very good at working in blank spaces. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's also an artist, and she was saying just the same, that it really matters what you've got around. And the funny thing is, because I have lots of objects that are not necessarily related to my work or work in general, but they begin to appear sometimes in the books. You draw a teacup or something that you happen to own, and it appears in the pictures. And then I have these stars in the windows. They've appeared in the Christmas book.
And you've got so many books as well. Is this a collection of childhood books or books that have inspired you over the years?
Some of them are childhood books. We used to use the library a great deal because my mother is a really, really big reader. And so we would sometimes go twice a week to the library. And so it was a very home from home sort of place for me, because we grew up in a small town. And before that, we grew up in a village, and that had one of those little mobile libraries, which was very exciting. So I got used to going and choosing. And then the other lovely thing about libraries is that you could order books and they would get them in from another library on a subject you were interested in. So this is really mostly a collection that I built up over time. And I certainly used to buy a lot of illustrated books. In fact, I still do, but I pass them on. So I try and just keep a core, a lot of books that I find interesting to look at and see how the person has told the story, and pictures particularly really interest me. With good illustration, they're doing something extraordinary, pulling out ideas from the text that aren't said in the words. And I think that's the real joy of good illustration.
Is there anybody in particular who really inspires you on that front?
There are some books that I think do that beautifully. There's The Sad Book by Michael Rosen, illustrated by Quentin Blake, that I think is such a perfect example of pictures and words working together to say something more than was there just in the text. I think he does that beautifully. John Burlingham is a favourite writer and illustrator.
Didn't he write a book about grief?
He wrote Grandpa, which is
about
yes,
grief.
And I was just talking about that the other day, and it so perfectly does that, explaining what it feels like to lose somebody. And it is a sort of holding your hand book. If you're very little, it does feel like the author is sitting with you and really gets what it is to lose somebody important, but without giving a big worry. It's recognizing sorrow, but giving hope. And I think that is so much the job of a children's writer and illustrator.
I think it's so much more complex when you dig deep. There are so many messages that you can get from a book beyond just the words, beyond just the illustrations. Mm-hmm. And you must be pleased that it's a year in reading, isn't it? 2026. Reading is so important for children, isn't it?
It is. And I think before that comes sitting with your parent or family member or carer and having that moment where you're being read to. And often there might be another child alongside, or maybe more than one. And so it becomes about connections and communication and bonding and love and all of those things. And one of the things I really noticed when I would read with my daughter when she was very little, not only the books that she would choose, and sometimes they wouldn't be the books I would have chosen, but realizing what it was she was connecting with that I hadn't maybe thought of. And so sometimes we'd be reading the same book over and over, and it was like a little way into what was going on in her mind. And then you end up having these extraordinary conversations, because when you read a book, particularly to a very young child, it's not just a straight beginning to end read. You're stopping and you're meandering and you're having a conversation, and then often the child asks you a question which takes you somewhere else, or they tell you something that seems to be apropos of nothing. You don't know where it's come from, but perhaps it's something that they wanted to talk to you about, and you're now in this very safe space to talk, or because it's something in the book that resonates for them and they want to talk about that.
Is that something that you championed when you were Children's Laureate?
One of the things that I really loved about doing the Children's Laureate role was the things that you got asked to do. And instead of always being asked about my audience, you were asked about what it is that I do as my art form. Think of a rather grand way of saying it, but children's books and the creation of children's books, it is an art form, but that often gets forgotten as if it's like a vocation. You're writing these books and you should, and it's all for the good of children. But something comes before that. So when I'm writing a children's book and I'm thinking about the images, because I write in pictures and words, I'm first of all communicating something back to myself that I think is important. And rather like any writer is doing, or any artist is doing, you're thinking, first of all, about something you want to say, and you're sort of communicating with yourself about something. And then you're working out how to communicate that idea to a wider audience. And will it make sense to them? And then it's the whole process of how you do it. And I think what I learnt when I was a Children's Laureate was that there are all these really interesting and dynamic people. And one lot of them that I met were really strongly talking about early years and the importance of that. So instead of just going into schools or libraries or festivals and doing your talk, you're actually having conversations with people who are very interesting and influential to my work. And they're taking it very, very seriously. And I take it very, very seriously. But it's really lovely to actually get more information around it. And I think that's what the experience of bringing up my own daughters, it made me realise what goes into the bones of us when we're very little stays with us for the rest of our lives, for good and for bad. And of course you can help things and you can mend things, but you can't eradicate things. It's in us. And so that is the wonderful thing about stories for children. Things created with children in mind are very powerful and very important because they do stay with us.
And of course, it's something the Princess of Wales has been championing, those early years and the importance of the early years. It's great that it's getting, I think, perhaps more recognition than it's ever got before, that those early years really are really important.
Yeah, I think they are. And I have no doubt that they are, because I'm now at the point where an adult will come up to me and say, I grew up with your books and this is what they mean to me. And they sometimes get quite emotional. And I exactly know that feeling because there were people that I felt like that about. And I would have got really tearful about meeting. And so there will be lots of creators of children's things, whether it's children's television or children's filmmaking or music or whatever. All of those things can give you that response because it's so powerful to you when you're young and you hold it as a way of supporting yourself in school. Sometimes I would have a Charlie Brown pencil case or something that I could look at, and it just sustains you, this idea that this character understands who you are And I think that's a lot of the purpose of these books. That when we look at them when we're very small, they go into us and we feel supported and understood.
They definitely do. I turned up at your beautiful studio with a very faded, much loved Charlie and Lola plate that's chipped and actually came out of the dishwasher this morning. It's everybody's favourite plate. My children grew up on you, my niece grew up on you, and it's really lovely to actually meet you in person and be able to come and talk to you about the inspiration behind Charlie and Lola and your thoughts on reading and everything else. I'm going to park the doll's house that I've noticed behind me because I don't want to forget to ask you about that.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you, obviously, about Charlie and Lola. It's 25 years now since you've wrote that first one. What was the inspiration, Lauren, behind the characters?
Well, I remember that one of the things I always wanted to write about was myself being a fuss eater. I think a normally fuss eater, nothing unusual, but because children are often a bit picky or suspicious of food that they haven't tried before. And it was as I was writing that I realised why that was. And it's because when you're tiny, you're trying things for the first time. They're all new experiences. And I think it's so easy to forget as we grow up and become adults what a huge thing it is being faced with a pie and not knowing what's underneath the surface. And I think people forget that it is a big deal. And so I Will Not Ever Never Eat a Tomato is as much about that thing of first experiences as it is about food. Food is the vehicle for talking about how it feels. But I was a child that found it a little bit difficult to try new things. I had a lovely older sister who is the inspiration for Charlie, because I grew up in the 70s when you had to eat everything that was put on your plate. So there was a lot of sitting at the table until you finished.
Till those peas disappeared.
Yes, and all those things. And my sister would come and she would just scrape my food into the bin when they weren't looking. And that managed the whole thing for everybody. So my parents could save face and I didn't have to eat it. And my sister didn't have to feel the agony of the whole thing. So it's a childhood memory it really comes from. But obviously I knew lots of children who had that block about food. And then I was just trying to think, how would this very sweet sibling encourage her to try things so it becomes a game?
What about my favourite character, Soren Lawrenson, as Lola's imaginary friend? Where did the idea for that come from?
Again, real life. I had a friend who had named an imaginary friend after her real life brother. So she had a brother called Soren, who wasn't very compliant in that she was significantly younger. And I only mean 3.5, 4 years or something. But that's a big deal when you're little. So when she wanted to play with him, he often had other things he wanted to do. So she came up with this imaginary friend called Soren Lawrenson. And it just seems such a brilliant way of managing the whole thing. And so there's quite a lot of her in the books because she also used to say schoolie form instead of school uniform. And so I just put those things in.
And did you have any idea right at the beginning that it would take off as it did? And also won you the Kate Greenaway medal right from the get-go, didn't it? It resonated with people straight away. Did you have any idea at that stage, Lauren, that your storybooks would be so loved and so appreciated?
Well, no. Of course, I couldn't know that. And I'd had a lot of failure before, like people turning everything down. Yeah, loads of it. And in fact, that worked out in my favour. I always think it can be a very useful thing because I'd written this idea called Clarice Bean. And because I'd had so many failures with picture book ideas and illustration, I tried to be an illustrator. Nobody wanted that. So I wrote this idea for a film. And then someone said, I think that might work as a book. And I trailed that round and I could hear in the way people were turning it down, it was different from before. It was like, we'd like to publish it, but we don't see how it fits into anything that we've already got. So I took note of that. So when they were saying, oh, I think you should write it differently but keep the pictures, or maybe change the pictures but keep the writing, I didn't, because I thought, no, I think I've done something quite good. So I just waited it out, and it was 5 years, and then someone published it. So it can be worth knowing those things. Whereas I think if it'd been the very first thing I'd written and someone had said, yes, we want to publish it, but please will you change the illustrations, I would have done exactly that. And it would not have worked. And so I think with Charlie and Lola, I'd done enough failing to know my own mind and know, I think this will work. I wanted to write about the tiniest things in a child's life, or the things that seem tiny to us that are huge when you're little. And so I wrote about bedtime, leaving your mum or your dad or your carer for the very first time and going off to nursery. And that is a big thing, but we sort of forget how big it is. And then about wanting to play with your brother, and he actually wants to play with his best friend. So they're all little things, but they're actually enormous. And so I had that idea, but I was very lucky, very fortunate to get the Kate Greenaway for that book, because there are so many good books. And that's the thing about prizes. It's luck as well.
There's always a bit of luck in there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
When you talk about big things that are big in a child's mind and perhaps not so big necessarily in a grown-up's mind, Christmas and your latest book.
Yes.
Waiting for Christmas. It's all about waiting for Christmas.
Yeah.
And I actually still feel like that now. And also reading it just really made me remember the joy of getting ready for it, actually. Christmas. It's all looming, isn't it? The 24th, the 25th. But actually the lead up, it took me back to being a child and remembering making the Christmas angels or making the decorations or paper chains that we used to put up.
Yeah.
I was a child of the 70s too, like you, and all the paper decorations we'd hang or the snowflakes we'd spray in the window or whatever. The Christmas book, was it inspired at all by any special memories of Christmas for you, or that desperation for Christmas to actually arrive?
It completely was, because I started writing it 20 years ago.
Did you?
Yes.
Must have been a long wait, Lauren.
And I remember I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? And I remember meeting my American publisher because I wanted to check that they would want me to write a Charlie and Lola Christmas book. And she said, absolutely, yeah, we'll publish that. And then I just couldn't think where to go, because there's so much of Christmas, and which aspect of Christmas to get into this book. I've got 40 pages in this, and by which I mean 20 spreads. It's not very much space to tell what it is about Christmas.
Not many words either, because of illustrations and how many words you average per page.
Yeah. It's probably about 1,000 words.
That's quite hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very hard. And I think that's often what people don't realise about picture books. It's really hard to write something short. But luckily for me, I then did a Clarice Bean Christmas novel called Think Like an Elf. And I was able to write about so much of what I wanted to do that I felt like, oh, okay, so now what am I left with? What do I really want to say about Christmas? And I thought, I want to talk about the weight and how difficult it is to manage the weight. And when you're very little, like Lola is, so she's 3.5, she probably doesn't even remember the Christmas before, or has a vague memory, but you're constantly being told about this thing. And then people are trying to get you to manage the weight. But days, what does a day mean? And what does a week mean? And a month mean? And Christmas, of course, now begins almost after you've got back from your summer holidays.
Quite ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And I feel it's really tough on them. So, yes, you're right. I was remembering my 70s and 80s childhood Christmases, and I used to get that butterfly feeling. It was very exciting. So I wanted to bring that in to remind children that the preparation can be so lovely if you can break it down somehow, because it's really hard for parents as well to manage that.
I think it's really hard when it's November and we're listening to Christmas carols and Christmas songs on the radio. Everything starts way too early now. I think there should be a December rule, because you've still got nearly 4 weeks to go. There's still a lot of waiting and excitement, but it's become so commercial, I suppose, in some ways as well. And I don't really want to see Christmas cards in October. But that's what happens now. If you go into a card shop, they're all there. And I think that's a shame, but it makes it harder for the run-up, I think, for particularly little children who, as you say, don't have that real sense of time, do they, like we do?
No, time is, I think, really difficult. So when I say the tomato book really is about first experiences, I think the Christmas book, though, yes, there's Christmas in it, it's really about how do you cope with waiting for something and imagining it. And I think because we somehow have to now make it a season, because that's what we've got really. The second that Halloween is over, really we're in Christmas proper, aren't we? And so I think if I can get children to think of it as we're living the season of Christmas rather than it's just all about the big day, because then I think the big day can be really difficult to manage.
I think as well, there's all those lovely things to do in advance. And you're obviously a very creative person, Lauren, and I can imagine you making things and decorating things, and all of that's magical for children, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the decorating can be, really special and something you can do with children. My mum was really good at that.
Was she?
Yeah, she really was good. So we'd make things. So you'd make Christmas biscuits, or you'd make candles. I remember we did candle making one time, and you'd go on a special Christmas trip and go and see something that just gave you that sense of a treat. It didn't have to be Christmas based, but it was a treat at Christmas. All those sort of things are really
important,
powerful.
Yeah. I noticed in the front of the book, you say the book's for AJ, who had to wait 10,512,000 minutes for you to finish writing this Christmas book. It does beg the question, who's AJ? And where did the 10,512,000 minutes come in?
Well, that goes back to how long it took to write the book. It's about 20 years. And it was because she was my publisher at the time. And so we had this idea that this would be a really good story to write, and we were both very focused on it. And then it was just at the time where the Charlie and Lola television had begun.
That must have been an exciting time.
Yeah, that was exciting. And I was working on that. So I would usually go in twice a week into the studio. So working on ideas and drawings and things with the production company, because it was in London, which was great. And I got a bit Charlie and Lola'd out, I think. It was so much of it that during that time, because everyone said, oh, you must keep doing books during that time. I just couldn't, because there was so much Charlie and Lola in my life, because they were turning into plates like your plate and pajamas and all kinds of things. And all of those things I would look at and have meetings about. So the very idea of writing my own Charlie and Lola books during that time, it was just I couldn't cope. And so I think that was part of why the Christmas book, it was like, there's so much Christmas, I don't know what to do. There's so much Charlie and Lola.
Put on hold, really.
Yeah, so I did, yeah.
You talk a bit about your growing up. You grew up, I think, in rural Wiltshire. Am I right in thinking Mum and Dad were both teachers?
That's correct,
but
yeah.
Passionate about art and art galleries. Can you tell us a little bit about growing up, Lauren, and how that influenced you, your parents' interest in art and things like that?
It was very ordinary growing up. My father was, and still does, teach art, but he taught at a school and he taught me. He's a very, very good teacher, and he's passionate about art. So we go to art galleries all the time. So that just became a bit like I was saying about my mum and libraries. That was like a second home. I've never felt I shouldn't be in an art gallery, but I know and try to remember that isn't so for all children. If you've not been used to going to art galleries, you feel a bit intimidated, like you shouldn't be there.
Did you love those galleries?
Oh, I'm not saying I wasn't bored some of the time or reluctant to go. I think that's all part of it. You get used to it. But I think what it did for me was I understood that environment. I understood that there were this many ways of creating a picture or a work of art. It allowed me to compare, why do I like that one more than that one? Why do I think these materials work so well? And so often a game that we would play is which painting would you choose if you were allowed to take one home? So children are very good at coming up with all those ways of entertaining themselves. Because my father would look at these pictures for a very, very long time.
Didn't he teach at Marlborough?
He did.
An eminent teacher, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I went to school at their local state school where art was not taught in a very interesting way at all. And then going there for A-level and just having completely different experience and understanding of art, because I didn't train as an illustrator. You don't necessarily need to, so long as you've got an understanding of drawing, painting, designing, because an illustrator has to understand how a page works and how a story is told or a picture is told across a page. That is what a really good artist is doing anyway. So I'd say Matisse and Braque and Hockney probably helped me as much as anything, actually.
And having your dad's inspiration, presumably. Were you sitting at the kitchen table learning to draw as a little girl?
Yeah, drawing was just part of what I did. Also, he did a Sunday art club for little children, and we'd go in and we'd come up with projects and things we wanted to do and do printing and printmaking and things. So I was very lucky in that way. And also because he'd get sent sample paints and things from Winsor and Newton and places because he was a teacher. He get sent these things. So I got to use those, and it taught me the importance of experimenting and actually the importance of having decent materials to work with. Because if you're given really rubbishy, scratchy felt tips, it's really hard to get a lovely result. And so
you had nice materials.
I was very lucky. I was really lucky.
I think, can I just say, I think you need to make some new plates, please, so that I can
I know.
a new plate. If that's on the cards, that would be great.
We do want to do that.
We do need new plates.
Yes.
I'll definitely buy the first one, Lauren. It just reminded me when you said Winsor and Newton. I wasn't a very good artist, but I loved drawing and playing around with things like that as a child. And I remember when I was very small, it was my nana's birthday and I was very close to my mum's mum. I think you were close to your maternal grandmum, I think, as a child.
Yeah.
And it was her birthday and mum gave me some money and she said, oh, you can go into the shops and buy something nice for Nana. And I walked into the local art shop. I'm quite ashamed of this. And I bought myself a set of Winsor and Newton. You'll remember these coloured inks. And they were in gorgeous little bottles. And they're like, it's almost like
you'd have things like with a spider illustration on
beautiful.
The black one and canary in a cage for the yellow one.
They were so lovely.
They really were.
My nan didn't mind that I'd done that. I feel a little bit ashamed of that, but I still love art shops. I love going in and seeing all the pastels and the watercolours and the oils, and there's something quite magical, isn't there, about that feeling, I think, of lovely materials.
I completely agree with you. And the results you'll get, depending on which paper you're using or which kind of pastel you're using. And I remember I did an event years ago, and they kindly gave me, whoever it was, school or something, they gave me a little set of pastels. And I'd never used pastels in my work before, and they sat on a shelf for years. And then I was doing this book called Grey, written by Laureate. It's all about colour and feeling in colour. And I wanted to just quickly show the publisher, this is the kind of thing I'm thinking. And I grabbed them just because I thought, well, that will be an easy way to show the colour. And then I realised, oh, okay, this is going to work really well. And it's the first time I've ever worked in pastel. But I'm sure that comes from that experience of my father giving me things to try. So I'm not afraid of trying things.
Yeah.
But also having access to things is really important.
Give us an insight, if you can, Lauren, into the creative process, whether you start with the writing, the drawing, and how both come together.
Well, I think going back to my years of failure, the problem there was me saying to myself, I want to write a children's book and illustrate it, and then I'll do something else. It was as if you can just get something done, a bit like me saying, I'd like to write a musical piece and then that'll be done. And that isn't how it works. You have to work your way into it and feel it and find your way of doing it. And what I was doing is I was trying to be somebody who could do this sort of thing. But I wasn't really feeling anything. So what came out was very dead. And then it was only when I gave up on this idea of writing and illustrating picture books that I succeeded. And that was because I decided I was going to write this piece about this girl. I didn't know if it was for adults or children. I didn't know if it was going to be a live action film or an animated film. But what I did was I went back to my love as a child, which was comic strips, comics and graphic novels. And I collected them when I was little. And I loved that you could tell a story purely in dialogue. I loved that words could become part of the illustration. And the way that they were put on the page, they were drawn like they were trying to show you what this word means. And so I did Clarice Bean in exactly that way, where I started to write and draw both at the same time, just in pencil, very roughly. And then I'd write the words as I wanted them to appear on the page. So they might be weaving round characters or upside down, definitely interacting with the pictures. And I think because I was not trying to write a book, I wrote a book. And then once I'd got used to trusting what was going on in my own mind, I then went on, and with nearly all my books, I don't actually need to draw any images. I just see it in my head. And I only start drawing images when I'm trying to prove to the publisher that it will work.
So it's all there in your imagination.
So it's all there in my imagination. But very recently, for the first time, I've had really, really serious writer's block. And it's been agony. And I haven't been able to write beyond a sentence. And I think, what is it that's wrong? And I think it's partly there's clutter outside of my mind because there's so much going on in the world that feels difficult and impossible. And so trying to push that away is really difficult as well when you can't express it on the page or in pictures. And I'm actually trying to write something for the very early years, really, because I think that is the most important thing. And supporting very little children is something I feel I can do with my books. So I decided I was going to write this series, which is called Lotta and Lola. And it's really about those intriguing, and I find them completely bewitching, conversations between very small children where they figure things out in their own way. And they come at lots of subjects sideways. And when you listen to them playing or trying to share or trying to explain something, there is so much wisdom in it, actually. They're really getting it, but they say it differently to an adult or even an older child. And so that voice of should and ought hasn't quite come in yet. So I wanted to have them explain things just using dialogue. And I realized how hard that is because we don't have even the narrator's voice, which is Charlie usually, and he will move the story along. I have to do it just between these two tiny girls. And I wanted really to stick to that as far as possible. He says the odd thing, but because this child psychologist I met once said, if only we could let children, as far as possible, figure things out for themselves and their disputes and everything, they will get there and it is their way of learning. And if we come in too quickly to try and resolve things for them, they don't learn how to do it. And we often mess things up for them when they would have got there anyway.
And where do you get your inspiration from? Where do you hear, Lauren, those little voices? Are you around little people to listen and perhaps earwig as to what they might be talking about or how they're explaining things that they must be feeling what's going on in the world because everybody's worried and feels stressed and we are facing quite difficult times. And I wonder where you pick up how they're seeing that situation.
Well, a lot of it I remember. And I remember that the most frightening times for me were overhearing things, either my parents talking or things going on, and then not having it explained. And that was sort of the thinking is, don't let them know.
They were grown-up conversations,
They were grown-up conversations.
Yeah.
And you might overhear the news. My mum listened to the radio constantly, so you would pick up on things. And actually, all that would happen is the fear would grow, and you would grow it into something much worse than perhaps was going on in either my family's life or in the outside world's goings on, it would just amplify it somehow by being told not to worry about it. So some of it comes from there. Some of it comes from when my own daughter was really little, and I just remember listening to the things that she would say, and I just loved that, and the words that she would, it was like finding a word and using it in a different way, but somehow it works exactly as well, or sometimes even better, and you think that's a perfect way of explaining it. And then just always listening to children if I'm around them, and I'm around them quite a lot. And I was doing a schools talk the other day and just noticing the things they want to tell you. Again, that comes back to the reading aloud with children and what they'll tell you. And I think I just done this hour-long talk with them. And then I feel you kind of build a trust with them, or they feel that you are someone they can tell something to. And there was just this moment at the end of this talk where this small boy came up to me and he said, "Oh, Lauren, you know, my mum's pregnant," like this. And there was just something very moving that he needed to say it, and he felt I would be interested, or I was someone that he could say that to. And then we had a little conversation about how he felt about it.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I just find those sort of things just really, really moving.
Yeah.
And this other girl put up her hands to ask a question. She said, "I've got a frog." And it was, you know, we established it wasn't a real frog, but she wanted to give it to me. And I think those things mean more than you think. It's like a little shared moment, and they'll tell you something when they come up to you at the end. And I feel they're actually all the important things. And I did a talk about this a couple of years ago, the difference between being an adult writer and talking to your audience and being a children's writer and talking to your audience. Because for an adult writer, you can pretty much guarantee that everybody who's in the room has chosen to be there. When you talk to children, you have no idea if any of them have chosen to be there, particularly if you're doing a school talk. It's not their choice, they're there. And so you're doing something different where you're trying to engage with them and you're trying to get them to feel understood and understand you. And it's a whole thing and a back and forth. The funny thing that can happen, I remember this brilliant moment where I say, "Are there any questions?" And one boy puts up his hands, "When can we go home?" And then another girl puts up her hand and says, "When can I eat my sandwiches?" And I just think,
lovely, because you'd asked any questions.
Any questions, and it's absolutely fine. And someone else will say, "I fell over yesterday." And I think Hilary Mantel will never have had those questions. Wonderful though she is, people probably won't share anything that personal with her. And I rather like that people feel comfortable to ask me those things.
I think that's lovely. And you see that through the Charlie and Lola books. You see, you've obviously got a lovely sense of humour, and you see those beautiful moments. And often they do come with humour in the book. When you're actually drawing and illustrating, I know a lot of your illustrations, they look like they're a patchwork. Lola might be wearing a dress that's made up of lots of different bits and pieces. Do you start with pencil with your drawings and build from there? How did the drawings actually come to life in the studio?
Yeah, that happened really because I'd looked at lots of illustrators, particularly if you look at the sketches of someone like Helen Oxenbury, who's the most amazing illustrator and beautiful draftsperson. Gosh, I'd love to be able to draw like her.
She'd probably like to be able to draw like you, just saying, Lauren.
Well, that's lovely. And Angela Barrett's the same. And I've looked at their rough work and they can build a whole scene in pencil and they seem to know where they're going. So that to me, it looks like a final piece. It's so gorgeous and thought through and they've got everything where they want it. And I would find I'd start and then I'd think, oh no, actually, I think I want the chair to be over there. So you rub it all out and you start again, or you draw the character and you've done their arm too big and then you have to rub that out. And then I suddenly realised, why don't I just cut everything out? I'll draw them all separately. And each piece then can be moved around.
Like an animation in a way.
Like an animation,
Yeah.
exactly right. And so say I'll draw a character and then I'll think with Lola, actually I'd like her arm to be reaching. So I can draw her a new arm and attach it like a marionette. And then I can think, well, actually, if Charlie's standing behind the table instead of in front of it, so I just put the table over the top of him. It then becomes a moving thing, so I don't get bored. Because once I've had the idea, if I possibly can work from this whole idea in my head and get it down in one as a rough, I don't really want to do it anymore because I've done it. So I realised I'm one of those people who has to be in the moment. It's like I never plot a book. I have to just work it through and it gradually finds its edges. And it's the same with the drawing. We're looking at a picture book cover for I Will Not Ever Never Eat a Tomato. And the lovely thing about, I remember doing that, and there's the characters sitting at a table. And when I did the very first edition, they're looking at a teeny weeny tomato. And then when we did a special 10th anniversary edition, I cut out a new tomato and I did the tomato really big. And that's what you can do in collage. And I learned that if I use photographs for the food that they're talking about and discussing, a real tomato to Lola is going to be so much more arresting, because if you don't like tomatoes, then an actual tomato rather than a drawn tomato will have that much more power to it in the picture.
That's a lovely way of doing it. And perhaps helped, I don't know, when you did Clarice Bean and the television work and the adaptations, your mind's already working really in 3D, isn't it? So that must have been perhaps quite a straightforward transition, was it? Because the stories are already alive and playing out in your mind before they actually hit the paper.
Yeah, that's true. And I think if I could have chosen to do anything, it would probably have been filmmaking. But I didn't reach that point early enough in my growing up. It didn't occur to me that I could go to film school. And I think if I had my time again, that's what I would have done. But in my head, I'm always a filmmaker because I see everything moving and I hear the voices talking. So even when I'm writing a novel like Ruby Redford, which has got no pictures in, I can't write unless I can see it moving and I can see the scenery and hear the voices. So I think that's a very useful thing to be able to do when you're a picture book creator, because a picture book is very like a film, because the images are certainly doing at least half, if not more, of the work than the words.
I think some people perhaps think that writing a children's book might be quite easy, but I think that's one of many reasons why you've become so successful, because the characters and the words, they do come off the page. They give you so much more to think about. It's so much more than the words and the illustrations, and they almost dance together. I think you can visualize it in your mind, so it makes sense that you've visualized it in your mind, and it's all kind of 3D the way you're putting it together. I think that's quite unusual, Lauren.
Oh, that's an incredible compliment. Thank you. I work quite slowly, I realise, compared to a lot of people.
20 years. 20 years for your Christmas book, Lauren. That's quite slowly.
It's very slow, isn't
I know
it?
You've done lots in between.
I have done a lot in between. But I can't just put something out because we need a Christmas book. It has to work on lots of levels, because I want anyone of any age to be able to get something from it. So I love that you picked up on that nostalgia part of it, because for people of our sort of age or growing up when we did, that preparation and making and doing thing was so big. And when I want to take myself back to what it was that I loved about Christmas, because I can't feel it like my daughter can feel it, because I'm no longer that age where it doesn't quite crackle for me in quite the same way. It appears there's a lot of obstacles that I have to get over. When I really, really want to think about what does make me feel really Christmassy, I think about when I was little, I think about my grandmother and my mum and that preparation thing. And I'm able to bring some of it to Christmas. I'm very good at doing the tables and all the candle and the lighting stuff. But that's what I want to do in the books, is to also engage any person who's having to read it to a child so that they can get something from it that is meaningful to them.
Of course, we were growing up in a time where we weren't distracted by our phones and social media, which has taken so much attention. It breaks my heart when I walk down the street and I see tiny dots in a pushchair with an iPad or being entertained on the phone to keep them quiet.
Yeah.
But I have really strong memories of Christmas, and my memories in Grimsby are of my mum's dining room being half the size it is now. So it was small.
Yeah.
But both sets of grandparents and both sets of great aunties and uncles all crammed round the table, and a little formica table in the kitchen for the kids because we couldn't quite fit in the living room, and a piano, and my aunties and grandparents just sitting down with no music and playing, and us playing cards for a penny on the king and all that kind of thing. I've got lovely memories of that. It was quite chaotic. And Mum bringing in a baked Alaska, which had ice cream in the middle and baked meringue. She'd flash baked it in the oven. She'd put a half eggshell, hidden it at the top with some alcohol in, and lit it. And I remember her coming in one Christmas day with that, tripping and slipping off the plate and just splodging onto the carpet. But I've got lovely memories of those sorts of things. And I do think now, perhaps we don't do as many things as that because kids are very distracted from a very early age by what's on their phones.
It's so moving that you say that, because our Christmas was almost exactly what you describe. Yeah. And those moments of you play charades together, there's one good film that you want to watch. So people go through the Radio Times or TV Times. I remember marking up programs that everyone wanted to watch together. So that was
Morecambe and Wise and all that.
Yeah, all of those things. And then you'd have your snacks in front of the TV, and that was a moment. And then you would play cards. And I have a memory which is rather similar to your mother's baked Alaska, which was my aunt, who was a very, very good cook, and she cooked this ham and pea soup, and she'd forgotten that because she was using gammon, that it was really salted. When she used that, the soup was completely, you couldn't eat it. It was so salty.
Oh, no. We were talking, I was on the seafront in Cleethorpes with my brother at the weekend, and we were laughing. It was pouring with rain. We'd got takeaway coffees. We were there with my mum, and we were laughing about days out in Skegness when you'd go for a picnic in the summer, the heavens would open.
Yeah.
We'd be in our little Renault car. Mum would bring a flask of coffee. So as she opened that, all the windows would steam up. And we remember just looking at the tomato on the front of your book, tomatoes dipped in salt and boiled egg sandwiches, then smelling the car up. And we just talked about so many beautiful memories. And, you know, I think we're very lucky if we've had a nice childhood. Mine was very straightforward and simple and loving. But I look back on all that, and I've tried the best I can to try and bring those into my family's world as well, and to really make them appreciate the little things and the funny moments. And the fact we were just sitting, 83-year-old mum and my brother, at the seafront in the pouring rain, looking out at the beach and all the car misting up, I think that had brought that memory back to us.
Exactly. I remember that because we would often have tomato soup in a flask, and that was one of the things. But yeah, it's really interesting. And the other thing I remember very well is that thing of everybody having to sleep on the floor in sleeping bags, because when your cousins came, there weren't enough beds for everybody. But that was also a kind of highlight of the whole thing.
Definitely. That was part of it, wasn't it? The adventure of sleeping under the coffee table in your sleeping bag or whatever. I did want to mention that you worked as a UNESCO artist for peace in Mongolia. What was your role with UNESCO, and what was that experience like, Lauren? I would imagine pretty fascinating.
That was really interesting. I worked with someone called Ben Ficini, who worked at UNESCO Paris, and he was part of a little division there, which was really looking at children in dire circumstances in all the countries across the world. So they would work with different people. I think they worked with Cirque du Soleil. I think that was in Brazil and Mexico, possibly. And so they would work on programs that would help children who lived on the street or had been child soldiers or had really terrible disabilities from growing up in poverty or dangerous circumstances. So there were different divisions of this. And I remember him saying, which area would you like to work in? And because I'd written a book called That Pesky Rat many years ago, which is about really looking at homelessness from an animal's point of view, and then trying to think about one of our least favourite creatures to be a brown street rat, a sewer rat, and think about what it must be like from the rat's point of view. So you do turn him into a little child, basically. And then his desire to be loved and have a home. And it was a very useful vehicle to talk about those things with children over here and then work with children. We did a project with children in Mexico City, in one of the most dangerous and poorest areas where a lot of children end up turning to drugs and things. But this wonderful, he was a teacher and he'd set up a refuge for children where they could live and be protected and fed. And the only rule he made was that they had to come to school. So he had all this schooling that he did with them, but it was also vocational. It was about learning how to do metalwork or baking or whatever. And he'd set up all these things, understanding that people need to go on to other things, but they had to be drug-free. That was his rule. We just learnt so much from doing that, but we got schools in London then to support this by learning about the country, learning about them, communicating with those children, then having Mexican evenings and learning how to cook Mexican food and things like that. And then raising money that would then go back to these children. And then we had Mexican women who had a sewing program there, and they made us lots of pesky rats, beautiful rats, and all wearing the little pesky rat outfits. And they would pay them to do that, and then we sold them at fundraisers here. The idea of it being not just a charity thing, but trying to get each other to understand each other's lives. And we did a little bit of that also with Mongolia.
And what was Mongolia like?
That was amazing. I loved working there. Ben and I had such a lovely time there. I just remember it was just so funny. The sense of humour seemed to be very much the same. That's the wonderful thing about going somewhere you've never been before. And when Ben said, where would you like to go? I said Mongolia because I thought it's somewhere I haven't been, and will I ever go if I don't go for a reason? And I loved how they looked at the world and how much they valued what they had and their traditions. They have a lot of what they call intangible heritage, which is one of the UNESCO pillars that they want to preserve for these various cultures and countries. So their intangible heritage of nomadic life and the singing and the clothes, because everything goes westernized, but all of those traditions of their Mongolian New Year and what you wear for that and what you eat and how you celebrate it and all the falconry that they do.
Oh, of course.
And the horse riding and all of that. And I think that all fits in with these festivals and things that they have that you have to look after by talking about them, allowing for them to happen. And part of that was we funded some little vans that travel across the steppe and visit all the nomads with some first aid and some materials to support mothers particularly, and to work with the children and get them to read and all of those things.
So important. And you ended up with much more than memories long term, didn't you, from Mongolia? Tell us about your biggest achievement. I think you call your daughter your biggest achievement in your life.
Well, yeah, because it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I think when I feel frustrated with myself, I can't seem to write a book, or I feel the world moves so fast and you can easily look at yourself and think, oh, I don't do enough. I'm not achieving enough and all of those things. And then I think, well, you can do it because you did manage to adopt a child from another country. And because I couldn't have any birth children myself, I had no real choice but to adopt if I wanted a child. But it wasn't second best for me because I'd always wanted to adopt and have a birth child. The reason adopting my daughter felt like my greatest achievement is it was actually doing something like walking into the unknown. Not only the country that I didn't know anything about Mongolia before I went. you're also working with a bureaucracy that you don't understand, and a bureaucracy in this country that you don't understand and feels pretty impenetrable to anyone who's ever adopted, even domestically. I'm sure most of them would agree.
It took a long time, didn't it, Laureate?
It takes such a long time, and as long here as it did there. And there are all these things that you have to jump through that nobody just having a baby has to deal with. All the rules and people coming to look at your house and people assessing whether they think you're capable. It can be quite extreme in the way that you end up having to look at yourself and feel that you're left wanting in many ways, that you don't come up to scratch.
When you know that you can offer a wonderful home, and I'm sure she brings you lots of joy, and I'm sure she loves you reading to her as well. Has it been lovely bringing her culture to life as well, so that she understands her heritage? And I would imagine with your imagination and skill set, that's probably been something you've really enjoyed, has it?
I think one of the things, again, this comes back to like the idea of failing for a long time, that for me, it taking so long to get her, which is 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah,
wow.
To adopt her. And the fact that I worked there, that was really good because I established good relationships and I understood the culture pretty well, just in a very personal, anecdotal way. So not in a bureaucratic way. I got to know people as people. And that was what I really particularly loved about them, is you're straight in. You're laughing with people and getting to know them in a really personal way. And I made really good friends, Mongolian friends, who were very, very kind to me. And they feel part of my life. And we've been back, me and her. And so I was warned by other adopters of children that you may find that your child, if adopted from abroad, may at the beginning reject any notion of where they came from. But you keep it alive, but you don't force it. But we've always celebrated Mongolian New Year, and we've got lots of Mongolian things. And she's got lots of traditional clothes that we have for when she wants them, and bits of Mongolian furniture. And gradually, she's become more and more proud of that, and she talks about it a lot, and it just feels very natural.
That's so lovely to hear, that it feels so natural and that you waited and pushed and jumped through all those hoops to get her. One thing I'd love to just talk to you and to end on, if I may, Lauren, when I walked into your studio, apart from the fact there's lots of lovely Charlie and Lolas and other illustrations around, and it feels a fantastic, inspirational place, of course, with beautiful light, which is important when you're an artist. But the first thing I was greeted by was the most enormous, beautiful doll's house. And I hear that's part of your life's work, is it? Tell me about your love of doll's houses. It's even been made into a documentary, hasn't it?
Yeah, we did a little documentary for the BBC several years ago. And that was a lovely piece to do, because I know a lot of people from the doll's house community as miniaturists, these most incredible craftspeople. And one of the things that they always have found is that people always think it's about playing, like you're like a child that's stuck somewhere in the past and you're an adult that is going back into childhood. They're craftspeople and they make these beautiful, beautiful things. And for some people, it's about a collection. For some people, it's about creating a home or a world that you don't live in, but you wish you did. So there's a wish fulfillment thing. For other people, I think like me, probably, it's about creating a story in 3D. So as a child, I was always interested in miniatures. I think a lot of children are, because it's a world you can sort of control. And yeah, of course, it was a plaything then as well. But I loved the making of everything, realizing you can make things. And I think it probably made me an illustrator in a way, and a writer, because you realize that by putting colors together and patterns together, or paneling a tiny room, you actually make it seem grander or bigger. You change the scale. By having a figure walking through a door you realise that the brain makes a connection and you're already thinking, why are they walking into that room? What's going to happen? Why has someone left a cup and saucer on a footstool? What does it all mean? Because we instantly are making stories of things. And when we come into anyone's room, we're putting everything together very quickly. Within split seconds, we're making a story about the person who lives in this room.
Do you make all the furniture and decorate the doll's house too?
When I was 7, I went to a little village school and discovered that my friend's mum had taught herself to build doll's houses and things. And she'd made a doll's house out of a cupboard. And so my mother very bravely went up to her and said, would you make my daughter, or find my daughter a cupboard? And then she became a great friend of mine. I think it's important to remember age is not the big divide. She's a good 20 years older than me. And you have a totally different relationship with somebody older or younger than you. She had this workshop and she taught me how to make things and she trusted me with things. My parents were probably very brave because I'd use a bandsaw and things. And so from a very tiny age, I was making things and they're quite rough and ready, but I'd make them myself and she would show me how to do things. And then when it comes to my doll's house, then I learned how to cut windows and make doors and decorate the rooms and build staircases and things. I do make some of the furniture, but I also love collecting.
It's been a real treat to be here. I've loved seeing where it all happens and comes together. So thank you for making time and talking to me about the new book.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. If you have a child to buy for this festive season, I Am Wishing Every Minute for Christmas, published by Simon & Schuster, is out now and is another beautiful Charlie and Lola story by Lauren with her usual humour and fantastic illustrations. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com, or you can find us, The Convex Conversation, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with the first British woman to work in avalanche rescue in France. So join me then.